Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. About 6 years ago, I had a conversation with a company that completely changed my perspective on the future of what we think is social media is today. And they said something really interesting to me. They said, Charles, the problem is users aren't just going into games to play anymore. They're going in to socialize. And it was after that quote, that conversation led me down a journey of starting the company that I founded 6 years ago, and a journey with many, many different enterprise brands into an entire world and a new communication vertical, which, you know, the title of this talk today is Social Media Marketing is Dead. That's bold. I mean, it's a bold statement. But we've got the data to back it up. And I believe we're at the beginning of that phase of social media dying and a new form of communication arising. So thank you very much for joining me today, and let's begin. And I think we need to begin at the beginning. Listen, we all know what social media is here today, but I'm just going to break it down into its fundamentals for you, just so that we can talk about exactly what has changed over time. Because social media has changed over time. So, many of you will probably, or some of you may remember, in the mid-90s, this thing called MSN that came out. Now, I think socializing kind of before then very much only happened in person and on a telephone. But this was groundbreaking, and it was groundbreaking because for me, after school, I just remember going on to MSN and seeing this green bubble, and it was my friends, and I went to something, maybe it was someone I fancied or something, and they were online, and I got, oh, they're online, and I can message them, and I can chat with them. Now, obviously, this form of social media was very much limited to just one-to-one peer communication, and there wasn't really a breakthrough until the mid-2000s with our friend Mark Zuckerberg, who came out with Facebook. And the difference between Facebook and that MSN is it was beyond that one-to-one peer speaking with each other. It was networks. And actually, funny enough, I've said the title of this presentation is Social Media is Dead. Many of you remember it wasn't always called social media. It was called social networks. And it's interesting how that name is actually dropped. So really, this wasn't about just one-to-one communication. This was about a network of your friends in one place. Then there was another huge boom in the social media revolution, where it was the birth of user-generated content. Now, I'm going to talk a lot today about user-generated content, and that's really, really important when it comes to gaming. But really, we had the birth of user-generated content on platforms like Instagram and YouTube. And this wasn't YouTube creating the content, this is the users using YouTube, mixed with social media. That created a really dynamic place. And essentially where we are right now with regards to the evolution of what was called social networking, which is now called social media, there is a huge abundance of content. And actually, that word social media, it's not that social. If we actually think about it, when we're on these platforms, what are we doing? Are we socializing with our friends? Are we hanging out with them in real time? Or are we actually just scrolling and just consuming content, particularly in TikTok? This is a destination where it's essentially a doom scroll of information. That's content that is not created by TikTok, it's created by the users. So that's a sort of evolution that we're looking at in the traditional social media landscape. And not only was the platforms themselves evolved in terms of what the capabilities were, but where you could access these platforms evolved as well. If we think about one-to-one communication with MSN, that was desktop only. And then with networks, yes, it was desktop, but more people had laptops, so you could kind of walk around a bit more. Then with the birth of user-generated content, it moved to mobile, and that's where we are today, where it's basically PC, mobile. I can connect with my friends, but actually it's not really connecting, it's consuming content. Right. So if we just think about what I just said there and then put that in a gaming perspective, well, how did gaming start? And where did that start? Well, actually, socializing in games was the beginning of gaming with arcades. And I believe it was at Stanford University they created the very first arcade in 1971. And these arcades were places where absolutely you would go to play games, but really potentially a predominantly point of going there was to connect and hang out with your friends while you're playing these games. And these arcades were incredibly popular. Then gaming morphed, and it became a bit more solitary when consoles started to come out. And actually, I remember growing up, and Nintendo 64 was the console that I played growing up, and Mario Kart was the game that I played. And really, it was quite a solitary experience. I was sat there on my own playing Mario Kart, and the only social experience was when I had a friend come to my house and we sat on the sofa together playing. And that's not a picture of me, but that's probably what I looked like. Then we had multiplayer networks, and this was basically the internet, and remember what I said on the last slide, when social media started to rise during this particular time. We're in the period of MSN at this point. Really, with the multiplayer networks is, yes, I'm no longer stuck on my sofa playing on my own. I'm actually able to go into World of Warcraft and play with a friend when they're in their sofa at home. So we are connected, we are playing together. And then we had the rise, and this is really important, very interesting that this happened at a very similar time to when social media started to move into user-generated content. Games started to move into user-generated content. And actually, the games that we see today are not similar to the games that we grew up with. The games aren't games, they're platforms. And the users are not just players, they are creating content. So you're starting to see a sort of similarity between traditional social media and these games. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about these games, but what we're seeing at the moment is a massive shift in the gaming industry in terms of business model, where it's actually the rise of user-generated content as a business model. If I just talk a bit about the business model between social media and gaming, traditionally, gaming has taken a very sort of, I suppose it's similar to the music and film industry, where you come out with a product, you buy the product, and you can watch the product or play the product. With user-generated content, they have their own economy inside these platforms. With Roblox, you've got Robux. With Fortnite, you've got V-Bucks. And if we compare that to social media doesn't really make its money off the users. It makes its money off the data that the users give them, and those data get sold to advertisers. So that's the sort of quick-fire history of gaming, and you've had the quick-fire history of social media. We will come back to this. But essentially, what we're talking about here is the fact that there's an abundance of content everywhere now. And if we compare the two graphs together, what happens when there is so much content? Now, the top one, social media, remember what I said, social media is not super social. The bottom one, UGC, we'll talk about how social that is and why I believe it's the death of social media. So ultimately, we now live in an attention economy. And from a brand perspective, every single brand out there is trying to capture your attention. And we're going to talk about that evolution of attention in a second. But just zeroing in on the future, because I'm talking about the future here, and we're talking about social media, it's very interesting to see how Gen Z and Gen Alpha behave inside these traditional social media channels. Turns out only 9% of ads receive more than 1 second of attention. Think about that. Only 9% of ads receive more than 1 second of attention. It's nothing. 1.3 seconds is the average time for attention in branded content on traditional social media. That's 1.3 seconds. Brands are paying quite a lot of money for those 1.3 seconds. And 63% of this consumer base use ad blocker. They don't want ads. They're not even seeing the ads. And if we talk about actually how much they're using social media, well, Gen Alpha is using, it's 6% of Gen Alpha is using social media. And when I'm talking about social media, I'm talking about Facebook here. We'll look at the other platforms. Okay, well done, Facebook. 33% of Gen Z is using them. If we look at Instagram, Instagram's done a bit better with this generation. 40% of Gen Alpha are using Instagram. 67% of Gen Z is using Instagram. And TikTok, the big one that everyone talks about, is the big Gen Z platform. Well, actually, only 60% of Gen Z are using TikTok. And 44% of Gen Alpha is using TikTok. This is the really important thing. 96% of Gen Alpha engage with games. 92% of Gen Z engage with these gaming platforms. And 21% of their free time in Gen Alpha is spent playing video games, and 17% of Gen Z's time is spent playing video games. So what is going on here? Now you can see that back in that first slide that I showed, when Facebook came to me in 2018, and they were essentially looking at gamers. And I said, why on earth are you doing that? They said, the problem is, Charles, people aren't just playing these games anymore, they're socializing in these games. And if they're socializing in these games, that means they're not socializing on Facebook. And we're meant to own digital social. We'll talk about what they've done to try and tackle that. They're making a big effort to try and do it. So from a brand perspective, we've got to talk about the evolution of this attention. We all know that everyone is creating content here, but what is the evolution of attention? So probably pre-2000, as a brand, you were limited to TV, print, and radio. And that's how you got your message out there, and that's it, guys. Good luck, TV, print, and radio. And in order to get in front of those eyeballs, there were gatekeepers, essentially. So if I was Gucci and I wanted to advertise in front of a fashion audience, I have to speak to Condé Nast in order to get in front of those eyeballs. If I'm Gucci and I want to get on TV, I might have to talk to Viacom or Comcast. But those were the gatekeepers. They controlled the eyeballs. Then we went from this sort of evolution, and a whole new thing opened up for brands, a whole new communication vertical, which was social media and digital. And guess what? The gatekeepers changed. And it was no longer Viacom or Comcast or Condé Nast that you had to speak to. It was actually Facebook that you had to talk to. It was Twitter, now X. It was TikTok. It's now Instagram. And the way you could communicate on these platforms completely changed. So it was no longer sort of a passive experience where you're reading an ad in a magazine and you're just viewing the content, but actually it was an interactive experience where you could look at the image, you could double tap, and you could like. For those of you marketers among us that was around during this revolution, it was a scary period of time. One, because we didn't understand it, but two, because actually no longer could a user just read the content and not say anything about it. Actually, someone can comment below and say, I don't like this. And that was terrifying. We are in the midst of an evolution now, where actually there's an evolution of attention, as I showed you in the previous slide, which is virtual worlds. Particularly, another word for virtual worlds is essentially UGC gaming platforms. But guess what? The gatekeepers changed. It's no longer Facebook who you need to speak to get in front of those eyeballs. It's no longer Instagram that you need to speak to get in front of those eyeballs. It's now Fortnite. It's now Roblox. It's Zepeto if you're in Southeast Asia or Japan. It's Minecraft. These are the platforms that are holding these users' attentions. Funny picture. This is a picture of my boarding school, actually, back in Dorset in England. But it's a good illustration. We used to play tug of war. It's a good illustration of what's happening at the moment, because there's now a sort of battle for attention where the old platforms are looking at the new platforms, as Facebook told me back in 2018, and looking at them with envious eyes and going, we need to be there. And they're constantly pulling against each other, and the new platforms are going, we're no longer games now. We're now adding in all the social features, and we're going to take your users. So it's a really, really interesting time. Now, how is this measured? Because this is a really, really difficult thing for brands when they're entering this space, is they go, well, first of all, when I was in TV, I had ratings. When I went to social media, I then had impressions and likes. When I'm in gaming, what the hell do I do? How do I measure this? And ultimately, the ultimate measurement of attention across all of these verticals is time spent. And that's how all of these platforms are looking at attention. So that then begs the question, where's Gen Z spending their time? Okay, so it looks like Roblox is the #1 platform. 180 minutes a day is where Gen Z is spending their time. The next one is TikTok, and that's the one that everyone talks about in terms of the number of minutes. It's 107 minutes, quite a lot. But actually, quite interestingly, on TikTok, 3 trillion views of gaming content, roughly, 3 trillion views is gaming content on TikTok. So even when they're on the social media platforms, they're looking at gaming content. Then you've got YouTube, but you've got 100 billion hours a year watched of gaming content on that platform. And then you've got Fortnite at 60 minutes a day. Then you've got Minecraft at 48. Then you've got that famous millennial platform, Instagram. But gaming is the 4th largest category by posts. So still leaking into traditional social media. And then you've got Twitch. And Twitch is 19 minutes a day. So Twitch is a gaming live streaming social media platform, content platform. So really, when we look at where time is being spent, it's staggering to see that actually the #1 platform is Roblox in comparison to all of these other channels. Oh yeah, Twitch, 21 billion hours, quite a lot. Now, this is the important thing. So when we look at content, and particularly branded content inside traditional social media, as I said to you before, the average engagement time for branded content in traditional social media is roughly 1.3 seconds, but in virtual worlds, it's 11 minutes. So that is a massive difference in these virtual world platforms to traditional social media. If you value consumers' time, it's the platforms that hold users for longer periods of time on the right. It's the ones that you want to be in. Right, so what's the landscape of virtual world platforms? So the first thing we want to look at is the monthly active users. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. This has all happened very, very quickly. Facebook cottoned onto it and told me back in 2018, but we started to see these platforms grow and grow and grow. So Roblox, I would say, is probably the Facebook equivalent back in 2007, 8, 9, with 300 million monthly active users on that particular platform. We then have Minecraft, which is owned by Microsoft, 178 million, Fortnite, 100 million, The Sims, 33 million, Rec Room, Zepeto, VR Chat, Decentraland, and Sandbox. These are the guys that got a lot of metaverse shout-outs during that period of time. But you can see how these platforms aren't in one place, they're in multiple places. Bit like traditional social media. You don't just have Facebook, you also have Instagram, you also have X, you also have TikTok. So once we've broken it down by monthly active users, we've got to look at the gender base. And I think there's a sort of, I remember when I first started doing Geek and speaking to brands and saying, look, gaming is the future of social media, and their immediate response is, isn't it just a bunch of 13-year-old boys in their mom's basement playing games? The reality of the situation is these platforms are pretty split between male and female. So we've got 55-45 on Roblox, we've got 54-46 on Minecraft. Fortnite, absolutely more in the male category, but still a substantial amount of female audience in that platform. Then we've got The Sims, which is more females than males in that one. We've got Rec Room, which is pretty similar to Fortnite. And then finally, we've got Zepeto, which is heavily, heavily female on that particular platform. So the preconception that gaming is only a male thing, it's totally incorrect. The actual average is roughly 33% female. Once we've looked at the platforms, we've seen the monthly active users, we've seen the gender, now we have got to look at the age. Again, debunking the myth that Roblox, it's just a bunch of kids in that platform. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. And as the platform has started to grow, we've started to see the numbers age up in terms of consumers. And if we split that by 300 million monthly active users, that's quite a lot of 25 to 29-year-olds, and shockingly, quite a lot of 30 to 45-year-olds. So interesting to see that the age, absolutely, there's a lot of under 24, but there's a lot of 25 plus in there. Minecraft, again, quite shockingly older audience in this particular platform, but yes, 49% is under 24 years old. Fortnite, slightly older, with over 54% being 25 to 29. The Sims, again, slightly older platform. Many of you will remember The Sims came out a very, very long time ago. And then we have Rec Room, which is very, very split between all of these demographics. And then we have Zepeto, which is a much younger audience, similar to Roblox. So that's what marketers like to do. They typically like to split by how many people am I reaching and who are those people. And the problem with gaming previously, it was always debunked because it was, well, I know gaming's big, but it's not that big, and it's just one single demographic. Well, actually, the data tells us it's not that way. So I want to talk about what happened in the last 6 years, because brands have actually been getting involved in games for a very, very long period of time. I actually remember playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and seeing vans in there in the 90s and in 2000. But the way that happened was very, very laborious and difficult for brands. Essentially, it was a very high barrier to entry. So if I was Gucci, and we actually did do this with them back in 2020, if I was Gucci and I wanted to go to Pokemon Go, first I've got to reach out to Niantic, who's the developer. Then Niantic has to come to me and go, do we want Gucci, do we not want Gucci? Luckily, they said yes. But if I was a brand that didn't have that sort of cachet, maybe they say no and I can't go in. The build costs to go into these platforms are super high because there's one developer you're dealing with. You're dealing with Niantic, and that's it. And that's the only option you've got. So they've got to build your branded experience in their environment. And the lead time is incredibly long because you're not the priority. You're a brand that wants to come in and get in front of those 80 million players that they have. But they've got a whole schedule that actually they're going to fit you in where they want. So high barrier to entry, traditionally. And temporary activations. There's no ownership of this audience. In Instagram, you can go in and create an Instagram profile, and you can acquire followers, and then you can use those followers and create content and reach those followers. Inside this, sorry, it's only temporary. You're going to go in, and then we're going to kick you out. It's not scalable at all. With the rise of user-generated content, there was an explosion that happened. So Roblox, not as a game, Roblox as a platform, allowed for low barrier to entry. So what that meant is you're not going to Roblox to build your experience, you're going to the players to build your experience. And there's 300 million monthly active users on that platform. So mirroring social media in the way that when you go to Instagram, you don't have to call up Mark Zuckerberg to create an Instagram profile, you can just do it. And that's what you can do in Roblox. So it dramatically reduced the barrier to entry in terms of the number of people that can do this for you. You don't just have to go to Roblox. Which created much shorter lead times because you could be prioritized in the person you're speaking to who's building the experience. Instead of temporary, you could be persistent. So in the same way, a brand goes in and creates an Instagram profile, acquires users and followers to produce content and continuously spread their message via their Instagram profile, you can do that in Roblox. So you can build your own virtual world, acquire users, update that virtual world, spread your brand message, and have them in there for an average of 11 minutes per session time. And then finally, it's scalable. And we'll dive into the numbers a bit later on how the numbers have gone absolutely berserk over the last 2 years. So I was lucky enough when, after speaking with Facebook, and they basically told me everything that was going to happen, I said to them, and I said, okay, this is all great. So you're basically saying that gaming is an evolution of social media. You're saying that you're going to be disintermediated by these games if you don't do something. What is the problem? So the problem, Charles, is there's no data. If we look at brands advertising on traditional broadcasts, you've got companies like Nielsen who will do measurement and attribution for you. If we look at social media, there are businesses like AppLovin, or there are businesses like Meltwater who will do your market intelligence and business intelligence. They said that doesn't exist for brands in gaming, so I said that's really interesting. I'm leaving to create Geek, which is exactly what that does. I then managed to get an introduction to the CMO of Gucci somehow through my stepmother, who used to be a fashion editor. And it was that classic sort of Nepo child thing where she called him up and said, Robert, my stepson has started this business, and it's really, really amazing, and you've got to meet him. I think he was like, oh, God, here we go. Can we jump on I'll give him 5 minutes on a call. Very cleverly, she said, no, he's going to fly to Milan to see you. I went in there, he gave me 20 minutes, and he totally agreed with me, luckily. So they were the first to really enter this space in a big, big way. And the stuff we did with them was absolutely, Gucci has their traditional strategy for social media when they're releasing campaigns. But now what you'll see is they actually have a strategy inside virtual worlds. And they treat these virtual worlds in the exact same way that they treat their social media profiles. The interesting point, and when the data comes back, is the engagement they get on the 3 platforms on the right way outweighs the engagement they get on the 5 platforms on the left. And that's fascinating, and that's why they're continuing to activate in this space. So it's not just Gucci that we do a lot of stuff for. Versace, most recently, we put them into Fortnite with a very temporary activation. And on their traditional social media channels for this traditional campaign, which, by the way, was for a shoe. Why did you go into Fortnite? Because it was targeted towards males, an older male, using data to access that platform and do an integration into an already existing Fortnite experience. For their campaign on traditional social media, with the average engagement rate between 1 and 4 seconds per post, they got roughly 200,000 minutes in 42 days. In Fortnite, they got 1.4 million visits in 1.4 million minutes in 3 days. So that is the power of these particular platforms when you're looking at attention. And all these brands want attention. Walmart, I'm in the land of America. We all know what Walmart is. They do traditional social media advertising as well. But again, their Roblox experience develops a huge amount of engagement for this particular brand inside just one platform, Roblox alone. So really comparing these social media platforms against these new virtual world platforms, time spent is a very, very important metric. It's not just those brands. It's all of the brands now are starting to build their virtual worlds, engaging these communities beyond what they're doing in traditional social media. It started really with Gucci back in 2019, 2020, and we'll go into the data. But what's very interesting is what we're seeing now is we're seeing these gaming platforms start to take those elements of the beginning of traditional social media into their own platforms. So remember what I said. When I was at school and I went home and I logged into MSN and I saw there was a green bubble because my friend's online and I want to chat with my friend, the same thing is happening today. It's just not happening in traditional social media. It's happening in these virtual world platforms like Roblox. And the difference is I'm not limited by just chat and emojis. Actually what it is I'm seeing the green bubble up in the top right there. And then I'm clicking in, and I'm seeing the world that that person is spending time in. So I'm jumping into that world, and I'm spending real social time with this individual in live, well, they call it at Roblox. It's very funny. I remember speaking to them, and they said, we don't say in real life, because everything in Roblox is in real life. We say in physical life. It's kind of interesting. But essentially, they're spending what they feel is real life together, far more real than what I'm doing on Instagram, which is basically looking at Instagram stories, playing Peeping Tom on my friends. And that is also an evolution of how we're expressing ourselves on these platforms. So, of course, pre-2000, We express ourselves physically. We still express ourselves physically today, but a massive, massive shift happened in social media, whereas if you ask a lot of millennials, how do they feel about their Instagram profile, some people feel like their Instagram profile is just as important as their physical appearance. A lot of people would say even more important than their physical appearance. And translated to the virtual world, what that looks like is your avatar. So a brand like Tommy Hilfiger, who we've been working with for a very long period of time, totally recognize that. And so when you're doing a form of self-expression in physical life, you also, Tommy Hilfiger wants to make sure that you can express yourself in your digital life. So what does that mean, really, for the bottom of the funnel? And one of this was a piece done by the Business of Fashion, which was Gen Z's most loyal brands Gen Z's most loyal brands generally. But the fascinating point is when we overlay the number of virtual world activations that these brands have done, you can see there's a bit of a correlation here. So when we're talking about virtual worlds, I think a lot of people think about it as just purely top of funnel or middle of funnel, but there is bottom of funnel activations now happening. Obviously, you've got paid media, you've got the virtual world experiences I've been talking about, you've got digital items for your avatars, but most recently with Walmart, you can now purchase physical goods inside these virtual world platforms. And if we think about that, we can look at it from a brand to performance level and a top of funnel to a bottom of funnel level. So what is it that we're able to do as a brand inside these spaces? Well, traditional in-game activation is very sort of top of funnel, and it's very brand focused. There's no a performance aspect to that. When you're doing in-game skins, those skins are being sold, so you're getting lower and lower down to the bottom of funnel. When you're doing an IP collab, that's not actually about going in the game. That's doing something like Max Cosmetics, where they're taking the IP of the game and then they're selling product based on that game. When we're talking about the UGC platforms and integrations, that's very, very much middle of the funnel. Of course, you can get awareness inside traditional social media and traditional media. But for engagement, virtual worlds, as we know with time spent, beats them all. Virtual items, brands are going into these platforms now, selling these virtual items. I'll never forget the day when we put a Gucci handbag in Roblox, and it started selling for more in Roblox than it does in the real world. I believe it was $3.5K US dollars to buy a Gucci handbag. Why? Why does that happen? Well, I go back to the mirroring of social media. Back in the days where you couldn't buy a blue tick on Instagram, a lot of people that really cared about that Instagram channel valued that blue tick. That had some digital currency. The same thing happens in Roblox with a lot of these items. If you've got the handbag, it tells you something about you as an individual. We've got virtual CRM activations. People are going into these platforms and doing activities where you're able to log in and put in your email. Gaming influencers is obviously huge, and that's across the bottom of the funnel. We've got rewarded and playable ads, which is very much top of funnel. And then finally, we've got in-game ads, which is starting to happen as well. So there's so many different activations and so many different ways that you can engage consumers in virtual worlds. It really depends on what you as a brand cares about. Okay, so gaming drives loyalty and sales. I'm just giving you some examples of things that we have seen that has happened. Walmart discovered an experience on Roblox. They have now started to integrate real-world commerce in their experience. So all of those minutes that you saw, you can now, at the end of those minutes, have a link to purchase. It's available now not just on Roblox, but also Zopeto and Spatial, other virtual world platforms. Paris Hilton, another customer that we work closely with, they got 27,000 signups through their CRM for Hilton Honors program through a Roblox experience. When you look at the value of a cost per email, you can really do the maths on whether this is worth doing or not, and it's kind of exciting. So then it's not only about having the virtual world, but it's also about driving real-world visits to stores. I'll never forget the Pokemon Go activation that we did with Gucci, where I think we drove 2 million people to Gucci stores around the world in 2 weeks, and that was because we put a Pokestop on every Gucci store in the world. And the shift towards real-world commerce is really happening, and Walmart is absolutely leading the way in this space. They're not the only ones anymore, but they totally are leading the way. And you can see here from May 24 to just February, very recently, how they've started to implement this, not just in one platform, but across multiple platforms. And it's not just Walmart. This time last year, Shopify recently released an integration inside Roblox where every single user who has a Shopify account can start to integrate their shops into that platform. It's all happening at the moment, and it's not slowing down. So today I want to talk to you about what is the landscape and digging into the numbers. There will be a QR code in the back where you can download this report, but I'm going to talk to you about some key figures that we have recently released. Some things you need to know just before we dive into it is virtual worlds are the platforms themselves. So Roblox, Minecraft, Zepeto, that is a virtual world. An activation is a brand doing an activation in these platforms. So it could be an integration, it could be an item drop, it could be building an own world. An integration, very important to know this, is essentially a brand not building their own world. They're going into an already existing experience in Roblox or Fortnite that has a high CCU, a high number of users, and integrating their brand into that particular very popular experience. The classic example between that and traditional social media would be influencer marketing. Essentially, building your own world is like creating your own Instagram profile. Doing an integration is going into Kim Kardashian's stories and dropping your content in there to reach her audience. And brand-owned experience, again, as I said, it's a bit like building your own Instagram profile. So here's the key data that's very important. One of the things that we do at Geek is we track every single branded activation that happens across all of these different environments. I believe this is already out of date because we're now over 2,000 branded activations that have happened since 2020. That's in the last 5 years alone. Now, how many brands went into virtual worlds? You'll all remember this sort of metaverse hype. This is my 4th year at South by Southwest. I love it. It's a fantastic place to be. I think it's the birth of the attention economy and where it's defined. But I remember the first time I went to South by Southwest, it was all about the metaverse and NFTs. And I remember being kind of frustrated by it because having had my conversation with Facebook back in 2018, I go, well, hang on, what is this? What is this? This has already been happening. This isn't something new. And that word really distorted the reality of the situation. Then we had the sort of death of the metaverse, that classic hype cycle. But the data shows that actually this is all still going. This hasn't stopped. Call it metaverse, call it virtual worlds, call it UGC gaming. It's not stopping. And over half the amount of brands that have ever even entered virtual worlds did so last year. So we're expecting a huge year this year for the number of branded activations that are happening. Okay, so how many brands have activated in there? There's 880 brands that activated in 2024, which is 38% bigger than 2023. And then if we look at how many brands entered Roblox themselves, the growth is 20%, so it's growing really nicely. You can see here, actually, this was sort of peak metaverse hype cycle. Everyone was a bit nervous and kind of expecting no one to go in. But as we can see, it's still growing, and it's still growing a lot. So the top industries in this particular platform used to be fashion and apparel. It's now been completely dwarfed by media and entertainment, films, new films coming out, new TV shows, all being advertised inside this platform. Fashion and apparel is number 2, automotive is number 3. Right, how many brands are going into Fortnite? So Fortnite has seen a huge, huge growth over the last year. 68%, in fact. So Fortnite, from a branded perspective, they do have a smaller user base, but they are growing far more faster than Roblox in terms of the number of brands activating in that particular platform. Again, we're seeing a similar trend with media and entertainment being the top brand category in that platform, food and drink, and musicians being the third one. So Fortnite is slightly closing the gap on Roblox. The user base is very different, and the user base is a bit smaller, but it turns out that a lot of brands want to go into that platform. If we look at the demographics that we saw earlier in this presentation, that could be something to do with it. Who are the most active brands in 2024? Well, Samsung came out on top, number one. Then we had Lego, then DreamWorks, Nickelodeon, and Paramount, all media and entertainment brands. And we can see that has changed over time. So in 2023, the landscape looked a bit different. We had our friends Gucci there, Adidas, Ralph Lauren. But back in 2022, those were very, very different days. So really, different brands are going in, and they're going in at greater quantities in terms of the number of activations that they're doing. And this gives you the complete look at every single category. And actually, from this perspective, there's quite small writing there, apologies, but media and entertainment is on the left. So you can really see how big it is in comparison to all the other categories entering all virtual worlds. So what are the biggest growth industries? Sporting organizations. It's not just the NFL and NHL that are going into these particular platforms. Individual teams themselves, very much like creating social media channels, they're creating their own virtual worlds. They're all doing it because they can see the data in terms of the engagement time. Toys and collectibles, pretty obvious one to go into platforms. I love this. Video games. Video games are going in too. Leisure, travel, tourism, we have automotive, musicians, and the largest growth industry, which I couldn't believe how late they are to this, is consumer electronics. It was actually fashion were the first ones to go into these virtual worlds. Now the consumer electronics brands are starting to catch up and saying, yes, we should probably be telling people that we can sell a phone here and a computer here. Very much like traditional social media, players don't go on all of the different platforms. In fact, it's quite fragmented. Normally on traditional social media, you might have 2 or 3 accounts. You might have an X account, you might have a Facebook account, and you might have a TikTok account. But really, it really depends on what platform you're in. So one of the analysis that Geek does is we look at all of the social following of all of these different games, and then we find out of those users what other virtual world platforms are they following. And we make that sort of assumption that if you're following that virtual world platform, you're most likely interested in that virtual world platform. And we can see there's quite a big crossover between Fortnite and Roblox. There's quite a big crossover between Fortnite and Minecraft. Sandbox, there's not much of a crossover. So they're quite fragmented. So just because you're a brand and you've gone into Roblox does not mean you say, yeah, I'm done, I've taken gaming. That's like saying, yeah, I've got an Instagram account, don't need to bother with social media, forget the rest, they're all fine. No, actually, different platforms will hold different users. And we're starting to see multi-platform strategies now. I mean, in the very start, I remember we used to work with innovation teams, and the innovation teams were just like, you know what, Charles, we don't really care about the results. We just want press and PR here, and we want to be the first to go into games. Okay, fine. That's now moved on. If you go into these platforms, no one's going to care. It's just not another story. You know, if there's so many brands that have gone into Roblox, it doesn't really make a difference. What does matter is the data. And actually, now that these brands are beginning to understand the data behind this, they're beginning to understand that they can't just activate on one platform. They're activating on multiple platforms. Now, we're seeing brands like Alo Yoga who are activating on multiple platforms with items. There's a really interesting stat that I read earlier that Alo sells more yoga pants, more virtual yoga pants than they do sell physical yoga pants, which is kind of crazy. But Alo creates all those assets and sells them across all of these different platforms. Again, I spoke about the way brands are activating is changing too. We always used to see brands build own worlds on these platforms. Again, so that you understand, that's a bit like creating an Instagram profile. Now what we're seeing is the rise of integrations. Why are we seeing the rise of integrations? We're seeing that because it's no longer the innovation teams who are in charge of entering brands into virtual worlds. It's now the marketing teams. It's now tied to marketing budget. It's now tied to marketing budget, so therefore it's campaign-based and campaign-led, and integrations is for a campaign period of time. That's exactly what Versace was going in to Fortnite for 4 days. So the rise of integrations is huge. An example of another customer that we work with is Coach. And you saw that Gucci slide that I showed you earlier. Absolutely, Coach is having a very similar strategy, but a bit further along in another way, which is they're not building own worlds, they're doing integrations. And they're not doing integrations on one platform, they're doing integrations on multiple platforms. In this case, Zepeto. Why Zepeto? Because it's got a very large Southeast Asian audience in Japan and South Korea. And Roblox, because it's a huge, huge user base. And actually, all of these platforms, they have slightly different activations, but they're giving a very, very similar message. And the results are really staggering as well. Across Roblox, it was 13 million visits in 1 month, 4 million virtual item try-ons. Across Zepeto, you had 30 million organic content views with 730,000 user-generated posts on that particular platform. Just to be clear on Zepeto, if Roblox and TikTok had a baby, that's what Zepeto would be. They've basically got a social feed inside their virtual world. How much does it cost? Now, because Geek is not an agency, we're a data market intelligence platform, I'm not an agency standing up here saying, well, it kind of costs, how much is your budget? That's the sort of question that a lot of agencies give. I'm going to give you the truth of how much all of this stuff costs. Obviously, there's multiple ways of getting involved, but an on-platform media buy can be variable. That can go as little and as much as you want. Releasing a UGC item, it really can go from not very much at all to $1,000 per item, but you can work with the community to build those items. You don't necessarily have to go to an agency to put an item on Roblox. To do an integration, roughly between 20 to even up to 500K. To do and build your own persistent experience, it can be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. Can be lower than that, actually. And what we're starting to see as more and more studios and more agencies are creating experiences for these brands, the barrier to entry is lowering, and it's being and more brands are able to afford it because the cost is less than that. So, going back to my first slide, what is happening here? And what do I mean by, I say, the death of social media? Well, actually, what we're seeing is a huge convergence. And the reality of what happened with gaming is it was hyper-social back in those arcades. It became super solitary with the consoles. It then started to become more and more social with online multiplayer. And now with UGC gaming, super social, spending 11 minutes with your friends inside these virtual worlds. And what happened with social media is it was one-to-one communication, then it was with the social networks, and then there was the birth of UGC, and then it just became content. And what we're seeing is the merge of the two. And actually, this is one of the platforms I want to talk about, going back to my original conversation, that kind of changed my trajectory with Facebook, now called Meta. They knew this was happening. So now they've looked at Roblox, they've looked at Fortnite, they've looked at Zepeto with envious eyes in terms of the user engagement time, and they're trying it themselves. And that's with Meta Horizons Worlds. So, this picture came out, and it was kind of embarrassing, and yes, a lot of people like to say, well, they're doing a really bad job. But I'm telling you right now, I want to be their friend, because the reality of what they've done is they were limited to that VR headset that not many people had and was kind of bulky, and you can't walk around with it very much. Still growing, but nowhere near as big as mobile and PC. But about a year ago, they quietly said, we're actually bringing Meta Horizons Worlds to mobile now, and we're bringing it to PC. So you don't just need a headset to go into Meta Horizons Worlds. That's quite interesting. So what does that mean for the future? Well, it's not here yet, but it kind of means that on Instagram you have follow and message, but they might just add another button there, which is enter. And if we think about what they're doing, in February last month, they just relaunched a $50 million Meta Creator Fund, where they're starting to look at all of these creators on these other platforms to start to build inside Horizon's worlds. And if we think about the monthly active user base inside the Meta ecosystem, I mean, it's 4 billion. It's huge. So if I go back to this slide and you access those 4 billion users in platforms they're already on, this is really kind of, I can see what they're doing here. And when they spoke to me in 2018, they kind of had a point. Now, whether they'll get there or not, who knows? But the point is there's a hell of an opportunity there. So yes, Mark Zuckerberg came out with that picture, which is kind of embarrassing, by that weird Eiffel Tower. But ultimately, you can see why they are spending the money they are spending to get it. Because they know that if they don't, they will be disintermediated by the platforms on the bottom. So we are seeing this convergence of traditional social media merging and becoming more and more gamified and more virtual. And we're seeing a convergence of those games becoming more and more social. So social media as we once knew it is dead. Long live gaming. Thank you. Now, I thank you very much, everyone. I do have 10 minutes, so if any of you have some questions, please feel free to raise your hand. And there's a microphone at the front here.
Do you want to go? Okay, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I have a question regarding how the brands are. You mentioned that there's a low barrier to entry as one of the pros. So how are brands identifying amongst the millions of developers or creators to identify which one is the right one for them?
That's a wonderful question. I feel like you work for me because that's what Geek does in many ways. It's very difficult when you're entering any new social. Think back to traditional social media where you're like, how do I find the right influencer to work with? Yeah. Well, you can kind of look on the platform yourself, or you can work with a Meltwater or a Creator IQ data business that shows you the perfect influencer to work with. That's exactly what Geek has done. So we identify all of the different creators and all of the different engagement stats around those creators, what they've done, how much they cost, so that any brand that's going into this environment, or be it Fortnite, Roblox, or Petto, can identify them. So you can do it yourself by searching on the platform, but if you want to do it efficiently, you can work with businesses like Geek.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
So I have two questions. One is in regards to data. The data, are these platforms providing the data, or are there third parties like Nielsen, you mentioned more in the traditional way, and even for today's social media, Meta, there's some third parties that you mentioned. Yeah, so are the platforms providing this data to brands? It's a brilliant question. Well, what it sparks is another point, which is the social media companies make their money from brands. The gaming businesses make their money from the users, and brands is this kind of new thing. So they are providing data to brands, but not in the same way social media is providing all the data to the brands. Eventually it will start to happen. Luckily, Geek is one of the only businesses in the world that has private data partnerships with a lot of these companies. So they make it available to enterprise businesses to a certain extent. It's a very waffly answer from me. The answer is yes, not as much as traditional social media at the moment. Okay, thank you. And the other question is, from a commercial perspective, do you see an opportunity, or is it already going on, where brand developers and product developers would create products to commercialize them in this parallel worlds that they don't exist outside of those worlds in the real world? If I understand your question correctly, are creators creating products that don't exist in the real world just for the virtual world? Is that right? And monetize them. Like, for example, we'll create a new sneaker brand that doesn't exist. And absolutely. Sell them. There's fashion brands which are purely virtual. And that's one of the things that really scared Gucci. Wow. Is they started to see that actually their brand was less recognized than a brand that they'd never heard of inside these virtual worlds. That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm a member of Gen Z and a gamer,
Yeah.
and often gaming serves as kind of a reprieve from being bombarded by advertisements.
Yeah.
Are games at all concerned about becoming a virtual Times Square with billboards everywhere in the way that TikTok or Instagram has?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And by the way, I'm not Gen Z, but I am a gamer myself. And walking around a virtual Times Square sounds horrible to me. I just don't want to see it. And I'm probably not going to play if I see that. And the game companies know that. So what I don't mind is branded content. And that is where a brand is going in and enriching my experience and adding value. If they're not adding value, I'm not giving them my time. So I think the games companies are aware of it, but the power is in the user base. And the user base, as soon as they start seeing ads, the user time's going to go down. And it's up to the game company to say, do you want your users or not? And they want users because brands follow users. So it's that important dynamic of social media companies only make their money from brands, whereas what's the savior for gaming is they don't just make their money from brands, they predominantly make their money from the players. So actually, they're always going to prioritize the players in that way because that's their big cash cow. It's their economy.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, this has been incredible. I have a lot of questions, but just the one. So as a musical artist who isn't in like the gaming industry at all, but is really heavily, like we've built all of our like followers from social media, where do we even start in the gaming world?
Yeah. Oh, well, you know what? One of our customers is Elton John, and we put Elton John into Roblox. Now, you wouldn't automatically think that Elton John fans live in Roblox, being the age they are. But like entering any new platform, the important thing is to look at the individual community and do very, very small things that resonate with the community. You're introducing yourself. So what you can do is you can work with creators and create items inspired by music. Actually, there's a lot of conversations happening right now. Universal Music Group, Warner Music Group, Sony Music Group, they're all wanting to fix this situation where you can actually listen to music inside these virtual world platforms. There are some solutions, but what I would say as a musician is this is think of it as a new social media platform that's kind of untapped, and you need to find your community and you need to add value to your community with what you do, your music. So that's what I would say, is start with the community.
Start with the community. And based on like the statistics, would you say that it's a priority as well over things like Instagram and TikTok in terms of putting the time that you have that you usually spend, posting reels or TikToks into the new virtual world?
The user base inside traditional social media is bigger than the user base inside these virtual world platforms at the moment. So right now, I would say absolutely the traditional social medias are a priority, particularly TikTok and Instagram Reels with the music and how we all know what effect that has. But what I would say is if you don't get involved now, you are missing the boat on fertile ground that is going to become very, very busy later. Yeah. It's already becoming quite busy.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
Hi. I'm a professor at a university teaching graphics and within also a multidisciplinary area of cinematic arts and video games. So my question is sort of from the student side.
Yeah.
Where should their focus be? It's sort of the merging of technologies and turning, because they're the content creators of tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And today.
Well,
and they're the gamers of today.
You just answered the question, because it's today.
Yeah.
Because actually, the average Roblox creator is super, super young. And they've grown up with this platform. It's a bit like someone growing up with Instagram and knowing how to do the filtering on Instagram. You can be any age and do that. And actually, the biggest experiences are owned by some of the youngest people out there. There was a recent experience that just got sold in the hundreds of millions because it was a big Roblox experience. And
so they're looking at it from just the minds of the student right now is they're looking at, I want to create the next new game, right? But you're saying a market at sort of the highest level of Roblox and Fortnite as already defined, right? And so there's a plethora of experiences out there currently, and it is a little bit filtered in terms of Minecraft is very large in our area.
Yeah.
So do you foresee those new games coming up to be new platforms?
Of course.
Or are they? Okay.
Remember what I said about Meta Horizons Worlds.
Okay.
I'd be looking at that very carefully because not
Okay.
many people have gone in there yet.
Okay.
But that's fertile ground.
Okay.
I'd also be keeping a close eye on Grand Theft Auto 6. There's lots of rumors that that is going UGC because they're looking at these platforms with envious eyes too. They want to be the next social media. So I would look at the UGC space.
Okay.
That's the fertile space. No problem. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a Gen X, but my wife tells me I act like a 13-year-old, so I'm kind of
Got it.
straddle both worlds. Do you see any brands that are business to business entering this space?
That are what, sorry?
Business to business. So they don't
B2B?
They're not B2C, they're B2B.
Good question. No, mostly it's B2C brands because the predominant reason of them entering is to reach an audience they can't already reach on traditional social media. It's to express their brand values in ways they couldn't possibly do. Some of it is to generate a new revenue stream through digital goods and physical goods. Now, B2B, there's a bit of that happening, but it's happening from a sort of corporate communication standpoint in terms of I'm L'Oreal Group, and I want a space in which L'Oreal employees can come in and work together and socialize and meet up because we're a big company and we're dispersed across the globe. And virtual worlds is better than doing it on a team calendar invite. So I've not seen major B2B brands enter yet trying to advertise to whoever it is they're trying to reach, but I am seeing corporate communications happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Last question here.
No, as a Gen Z, Gen X
Nice.
as well, what happened to Second Life? If virtual worlds are the future, what happened?
It's
What
so
did they
sad.
do wrong?
You know what? I just didn't mention Second Life, and I should have, because that was the original, almost UGC platform. I think it was just well ahead of its time and not, the space wasn't ready for it yet. It was just a bit too niche. I think the company is actually still going, but
No one talk about that. But
I'm afraid the user base has already been defined in many of these virtual world platforms. I'm sure there are new ones that will come up, but they've got to compete against 300 million monthly active users from Roblox and 70 from Fortnite and 100 million from Minecraft.